Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Arena, and this week we're going to be playing a much requested deck, but with a twist. So, today I'm going to be showcasing a Mardu Legends list. So, for those who are new to the channel, semi-recently, made a red-white Legends list that was kind of built around Squee the Immortal, and leveraging the legendary aspect of him and the fact that he couldn't die, so that we could cast all of the legendary sorceries and get some legendary value from things like Blackblade Reforged. So that deck was pretty good, however it did have one fatal flaw. Being in red-white, it couldn't really interact with control all too much, so we were really relying on drawing Squee, casting him with a resolved Blackblade Reforged and hoping that would get us there. Now, that still is somewhat of a plan. We can still get Squee down as a 3-mana 2/1 legendary creature, good boy, of course, and control really will struggle with him. The only way that they can get rid of him is by tucking him with Teferi back into our deck, which is only a temporary solution. You could Ixalan's binding him, but not many bindings are seeing play these days, and it's also not really a lock because of one of our legendary sorceries as well, Urza's Ruinous Blast, which is a 5-mana legendary sorcery that exiles all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. So in game 1, at the very least, we can use that to destroy any Ixalan's bindings and things like that. The downside is that it doesn't hit planeswalkers and obviously legendary creatures like Lyra and Chromium and other control-related stuff. But we're not all in on defeating control with this one. We are just splashing black though, so that we do have some extra tools against that matchup. Speaking of, we have 3 copies of Duress, which is a 1 black mana sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You get to choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card, so planeswalkers, enchantments, artifacts, anything of that sort. Counter spells, also a good one. This will help us to resolve our all of our spells in the early game from the control in game 1. And it will also get rid of any removal spells as well, should we want to slap down something like Danitha or Captain Lannery Storm onto turn 3. So, to speak about Lannery and Danitha, Lannery and Squee are kind of the focal point of the deck. They are the reason why this list actually works. Squee, obviously, allows us to cast our legendary sorceries, which can only be cast if we have a legendary creature or planeswalker in play. So, if your opponent kills your Lyras, your Lannery Storms and things like that, you actually can't cast Immolating Inferno, Vile Offering, or Ruinous Blast. So there are 5 cards in the deck that would be completely dead if your opponent's playing mono removal deck. However, the fact that Squee can return repeatedly makes that a big problem for our opponent and makes these cards suddenly playable. So something to keep in mind there. But yes, as we were mentioning, Lannery Storm is kind of the bread and butter of this deck. She makes this work. And the reason for that is because she adds treasures, and she's pretty sweet for doing that as well. So a 3-mana 2/2 legendary creature human pirate with haste. So we can attack with her on turn 3. She will then, on the attack, create ourselves a treasure token, which on turn 3 gives us our 4th mana, and then we drop down our 4th mana to get 5, and then automatically we're already at the top of our curve as well. So she is like the greatest source of ramp in this list, and obviously she combos quite well. Being a legendary creature herself, we can actually ramp into our Ruinous Blasts and things like that should we need it. Blackblade Reforged, of course, is how we make all of these 2/2s a little bit more powerful, because we have a lot of 2/2s. We have 9 creatures in the 3-drop slot, which are 2/2s and 2/1s. Blackblade Reforged is a 2-mana artifact equipment, and it says the equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Now, the equip is normally 7, however, in this deck, it is only ever going to be 3, because we don't have any non-legendary creatures in this list. It does hurt us to have non-legendaries in the list, because, of course, Ruinous Blast is a thing, so we really don't want any non-legendary objects. We have to keep that in mind though when we're generating treasures, because of course they aren't legendary and neither is the treasure map, but if we can flip it over to Treasure Cove then we can keep that safe. Lannery is also a really good source of card advantage with the treasure map, because if we can flip the treasure map and turn it into Treasure Cove, then every single treasure that Captain Lannery Storm generates on her attack, we can actually sack with Treasure Cove during the attack step and that will draw us a card, but also give Lannery Storm +1/+0, so she's certainly capable of trading off with some bigger stuff later down the line if we use our treasures correctly. But Blackblade Reforged turns all of these things into monsters. We will get Blackblade probably down around turn 4, so this is like a minimum +4/+4 to absolutely any of our creatures. So if we look at like Danitha, +4/+4 makes her a 3-mana 6/6 first striking vigilant lifelink, which is absolutely disgusting. Lannery Storm can start getting in as well as a 6/6 not much will blocker, so we get to start generating those treasures, gaining card advantage that way. It's pretty sweet. And if our opponent tries to kill all of our creatures so that we don't have anything to equip our Blackblade to, Squee's always here to keep being cast over and over and over again, so he's a repeatable threat that will never go away, so your opponent constantly has to deal with a Squee that might be something like a 15-14 for the rest of the game, unless they can get rid of Blackblade Reforged, which is kind of difficult in this format at the moment. The big removal spell that's being played right now is Mortify, which kills only enchantments or creatures, so you can hit Squee, but you can't hit Blackblade. We are running Bedevil in this particular case, but it's not seeing too much play at the moment. It might when War of the Spark comes out, I'm not entirely sure, but Bedevil, double black and a red instant speed, allows us to destroy an artifact, creature, or planeswalker. So this is one of the reasons why we're splashing black in the deck this time around. We want the black for planeswalker removal. Artifacts are also kind of a thing, but not against us. We're mainly running this as planeswalker removal, but we want the early game removal as well, because we don't really want anything in the 4-drop slot since we're going from 3 to 5 anyway. We might as well just go Bedevil on 3 up to like Vile Offering to kill a planeswalker or something like that. But yeah, this might see more play when War of the Spark comes around, since it is planeswalker removal, but right now, Bedevil is seeing like next to no play from what I've seen, so we don't really have to worry about artifact removal all that much, so Blackblade is likely the safest thing. Yeah, enchantments aren't really safe in this meta right now because of Mortify, but artifacts are absolutely amazing at the moment, so we're going to be running a bit of an artifact package. I used to have like Ixalan's Bindings to deal with planeswalkers in the sideboard, but of course most control decks these days run like 4 copies of Mortify, so they always have answers to Ixalan's Bindings, so it's just not really a good option. Let's speak about the legendary sorceries that we're trying to leverage off of Squee, I suppose. We've got Jaya's Immolating Inferno, which is essentially a really good Banefire. Double red and X, and X is however much we want to pay for it. Jaya's Immolating Inferno deals X damage to up to 3 targets, so we can hit a planeswalker, we can hit a creature, and we can hit the player. We can do all 3 of those in one go as well. This thing does get some really nice 3-for-1s quite a lot of the time. Of course, it needs a legendary creature or planeswalker in play for us to cast it, but that's really quite achievable. It's a wonderful sweeper and a wonderful planeswalker removal spell. Our other one is Urza's Ruinous Blast. 5 mana legendary sorcery, gets rid of all of the non-legendary permanents, so treasure tokens, unfortunately for us, we have to be careful to crack those first and use those as Ruinous Blast mana, but it gets rid of Conclave Tribunal, Wilderness Reclamation, Ixalan's Binding, fair few creatures in the format. This can be just a normal board wipe as it stands. It's pretty sweet. We will bring this out in the control matchup because nearly everything is legendary in their deck that is permanent based anyway that we want to hit. So other than that, it is going to hit quite a lot in the format, but that's why we're running 2 copies of it. Yawgmoth's Vile Offering is a card that I've tried out a few times, and it ended up going down to a 1-of, because it is pretty sweet when you can get the value off of it, but its value is kind of hard to achieve quite a lot of the time, so 1 copy is all I could really muster in this list. 5 mana to kill essentially 1 creature or planeswalker and reanimate 1 creature or planeswalker. So 5 mana is usually reserved for doing one of those things, but not both, which is why we can get some superb value. We cannot kill our opponent's planeswalker and reanimate the same one. We actually have to have 2 separate targets, so we've got to keep that in mind. But if we're up against control, we can take our opponent's Teferi and maybe kill their Teferi that's currently in play, that kind of thing. And that's basically how we want to be using this one, trying to get some value out of it. We do have a fair few targets we want to reanimate out of our own graveyard with Vile Offering. We have 2 copies of Lyra Dawnbringer, which is a 5 mana 5/5 with flying, first strike, and lifelink. and she doesn't really do much other than that. She is just a Baneslayer Angel in this deck, essentially. And we have Angrath the Flame Chained as well as our top-end Planeswalker. 5 mana for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. The tick up is good for control. It allows us to force our opponent to discard and then they lose 2 life, so it puts a clock on our opponent. I actually managed yesterday to ult my Angrath for I think the first time actually and kill my opponent, which was wonderful. So yeah, we keep our opponent pinched on cards in hand, which is exactly where control doesn't want to be. We can also minus as well in a creature-based matchup to steal a creature from our opponent, untap it, and then attack with it. And if it's got a mana cost of 3 or less, it's also a removal spell from Angrath as well, which is quite nice. And the -8 is a win con of sorts. Each opponent loses life equal to the number of cards in their graveyard. So control uses a lot of spells, and we can get some value out of that. So if our opponent's life total goes lower than the number of cards in their graveyard, we'll just ult Angrath and win the game. So in our 2-drop slots, we have a fair few things. Treasure Map I've talked about a little bit. This is our form of card advantage. We can combo it with Lannery Storm so that we can draw extra treasures. It's also ramp as well. It guarantees we can get up to the 5-drop slots as well off of the flip, because we get 3 treasure tokens when we flip Treasure Map over the next 3 turns. Copy of Lava Coil in here as well as a bit of early game removal, 4 damage to a creature, and if it would die, exile it instead. Good against the Sultai mid-ranges, because you do not want them to reanimate any of their stuff with Fine Finality and things like that. Ended up going down to 1 copy because we do have a fair few removal spells in the 3-drop slot, which we are more than capable of getting to before dying. Speaking of, Mortify destroys creature or enchantments, bedevils, artifacts, creatures, or planeswalkers, and 2 copies of Deafening Clarion for the aggro or creature-based matchups. It is a Boros 3-mana spell. We can choose one or both. We will actually use both in a fair few cases. Deafening Clarion deals 3 damage to each creature, so a nice little board wipe right there. And also, creatures you control gain lifelink until the end of the turn. So one fun thing about Deafening Clarion is we can give lifelink to all of our legendaries. Other than Danither and Lyra, we're going to get some value out of that. Blackblade giving +1/+1 to all of our creatures most likely brings them out of Deafening Clarion burn range. So what we can do is we can wipe the board and give a creature's lifelink, so Squee or Lannery can actually get lifelink to swing in. And as we mentioned, these guys are going to get quite big with the Blackblade, so pretty sweet there. That's essentially the deck. The mana base is Mardu colours. We got 2 Codler Shrines, 2 Isolated Chapels. We are running the full play sets of the red and black and red and white lands, because that is basically what we are splashing for. We need that 3 mana on Bedevil there on turn 3 if we can help it. So the Blood Crypts and the Clifftop Retreats get us there super quick. It was very nice indeed. And 1 copy of Arch of Araska, because it is very easy for us to get the City's Blessing, and this is a source of card advantage in the late game as well. So the Ascend says you need 10 or more permanents in play. We make a lot of treasures with our treasure maps and Lannery Storms, so it's quite easy for us to get Arch of Araska, and drawing an extra card every turn is pretty sweet. So as I mentioned, this deck is kind of teching against the control meta right now, so we're going to be trying to take down a fair few of those. The sideboard kind of reflects that as well. We're going to be kind of doing a mid-range style in this deck. I would call this a mid-range deck. It is trying to take care of aggro and control simultaneously, so both ends of the spectrum. It is also capable of winning in a control situation in the long game, as well as in the short game as well. Lannery Storms, Danithers can beat aggro decks that way out. So the sideboard is essentially something that we'll use to flip our deck either into a more long game strategy or a more short game strategy. So the sideboard has a lot of control pieces in here. In fact, it hates almost entirely on control for the most part. We have the 4th copy of Duress so that we can start eating our opponent's hand. 2 copies of Drill Bit as a Thoughtseize if we can get this down on turn 3 with Lannery Storm swinging in. Gains the damage, generates as a treasure, then allows us to use the black mana off that treasure to Spectacle. It's the best that we can really get in terms of discard at the moment, but with Squee being able to deal damage, it makes it a kind of a legitimate threat, even if it is a 2/1 getting in, because we get that Spectacle so that we can do some stuff. Even as a 3 mana discard spell, it is just fine, honestly, against control. Target player reveals their hand, we get to choose any non-land permanent, and they discard that card. We have 2 copies of Sorcerer's Spyglass as well. 2 mana artifact. As it enters the battlefield, you get to look at your opponent's hand, so we get to play around a fair few things. We get to choose a card name, and the activated abilities of sorceries with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So what we can do is name planeswalkers. That is the primary use of Sorcerer's Spyglass. So against the control matchup, we want to name Teferi and occasionally Kaya sometimes. So we'll name those and then they can't be activated. You can also name Azcanta the Sunken Ruin as well. You do not want to name Azcanta Search. You do not want to name Search for Azcanta, you actually want to name Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, the flipped land, if you are going to use it on Sorcerer's Spyglass, but that is another application for it. So if you have one Spyglass down and you're confident that it's going to stay there, then your second one can name Azcanta the Sunken Ruin against the control matchups. You can also name the second Planeswalker if you want, like Kaya, if you believe them to have it. We also have the fourth copy of Bedevil as well to take down more Planeswalkers. It's also here for creature removal anyway, which is kind of nice, and artifacts if that ends up being a thing. 2 copies of the Immortal Sun. What we'll do is swap out Angrath and the Ruinous Blast. These two are dead cards in the control matchup, so they're coming out. Sorry, this isn't dead in the control matchup, but we will be ringing in the Immortal Sun anyway, so Angrath will come out for the Immortal Sun. I'd rather lock their Planeswalkers out than use my own, essentially. So, Immortal Sun is a 6-mana legendary artifact. It says players can't activate Planeswalkers' loyalty abilities, so completely shuts them off. And then at the beginning of your draw step, you draw an additional card, which is something Control doesn't want us to do. We also get cost reduction and an Anthem on some of our creatures as well. So some of these things now no longer die to Moment of Craving as an example. Not too bad at all. 2 copies of Star Extinction. We are really hating on Planeswalkers. So 7 mana for a board wipe. Destroys a land, and it deals 20 damage to each Planeswalker and each creature, so nothing really will survive Star of Extinction. Very hard for that to happen, so again, Angrath is probably coming out because we're going to be ringing in a lot of Planeswalker hate. So he's nice in the main, just so that we can have some action against that deck, but in the second and third games, we certainly want to be bringing him out. So, as I mentioned, we do occasionally shift into more of a more aggressive strategy, or defense against aggressive and defense against control. So we have 3 copies of Moment of Craving as our defense against aggro. 2 mana, 1 and a black, instant speed. Target creature gets -2/-2 until the end of the turn, so we can kill our Danto Vanguards through indestructibility if it's the mono white aggro list. It's also pretty good against the mono red lists as well, because it's a bit of life gain. We want to be picking off their creatures real early so that they don't get their spectacle for light up the stage and things like that. So killing that. Gaining life is also very important. The way that we win the aggro matchup is to either resolve a Lyra or a Danitha and keep her alive. Danitha in that case does need to have Blackblade equipped, but she's easy enough to equip since she actually cuts the cost of Blackblade's equipment. So we can go Danitha on turn 3 if we think that she's going to live, and then turn 4 we can actually play Blackblade because of the cost reduction and equip on the same turn. And if you manage to equip Danitha, the game's pretty much over against like mono red aggro and things like that. So there's really nothing they can do about it, and you just start gaining first strike lifelink damage for the rest of the game, which is pretty sweet. 2 copies of the Deafening Clarions as well, so we can keep wiping our creatures' boards as well, and give lifelink to all of our non-lifelinking creatures if it will come to it. That's essentially the deck, guys, though. I hope you enjoyed this one. It is a lot of fun to play. We did play this one on stream a fair bit and got some decent results. I would say that the good matchups are the control matchups because we are teching heavily against them. A fair few creature matchups are very good as well. The one bad matchup that I've seen is against unfair decks, the things that run like Nexus. Gates is also a pretty bad matchup for us, it turns out. We can't really deal with the constant recursion from Gate Colossus unless we get a really lucky Ruinous Blast off or something like that, or we manage to resolve one of our big creatures. It's very difficult for us to beat something like an Expansion Explosion X20 if they're going to Wilderness Reclamation us. So as far as matchups are concerned, as long as the game is fair, a matchup is fair, it's not a combo list or anything like that, we have a reasonable matchup, but for the most part, we don't really see too many Gates and Reclamation decks these days, so, you know, it's fine. Hope you guys enjoy this one. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon so you get notifications when I release videos in the future, and I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the games.